I do think people don't quite understand the scale of automotive in the UK. We are a very, very big manufacturer of vehicles and also engines. And actually we have 823,000 people, probably more actually in the UK, employed in that sector. And I guess, overall we're making somewhere well over 1 million, sort of 1.25 million of cars a year, and a similar number of engines, if not a bit more. We export most of those to about 160 countries worldwide. And I think the piece in terms of money, in terms of what it's worth, I'm going to pick up on is the amount spent on R&D. So that's estimated to be about £3.75 billion worth of car company money is actually spent on research and development in the UK. And so obviously Innovate UK, we partner very closely with them.
I guess, if we're talking about EVs, really the government that you have to talk about is China, just because China has become the behemoth in lithium-ion battery manufacturing and in the EV space, at least until 2020. And I'm sure most people are aware, things took a bit of a turn, a flip on the head in 2020 because of coronavirus and because of activity in the EU. But before that, in the last decade, China was kind of leading the way in cell development and electric vehicles, but it wasn't necessarily a kind of simple route to getting there, if you like. China kind of invested a lot of money in, the Chinese government invested a lot of money in cell manufacturing, but they found that alone doesn't necessarily lead to EV sales. And so they the way that they kind of grew their electric vehicle industry and became this kind of behemoth, in the vehicle space, was through kind of direct EV subsidies, and that's what kind of kick-started electric vehicle adoption in China in 2015 or so. Between 2015 and 2016, we saw the EV sales go from about 100,000 up to 300,000, and in 2020 that was over 1 million EV sales in China. Europe caught up though and actually surpassed China with slightly more EV sales last year.
Particularly as we look at, from Ilika's perspective, the emerging technologies, there is a strong role for government. Maybe in America there's also a role for venture capitalism, and that's their version of the same.
The one thing I think that government can do, so government can do a few things, right? In general, it can regulate, it can educate, it can influence, and actually regulation is the one thing that gives a much higher confidence level for strategy, right? So if the UK government says, look, we're going to regulate to net zero by 2050, that's actually huge, right? And we were the first country to do that, and that's a significant statement. What you see from that then is you can then start to break that down. Well, what does that actually look like? How does that break? What's the pathway for the UK to go from here to net zero by 2050? And you can start to say, well, how much of that is electrification? How much of that electrification is surface transport? How much of the surface transport is passenger cars or vans or whatever? And we can see very high numbers. So we then start to go as companies or even VCs, say, actually, that direction is going to have a huge market and it's a huge influence. So you saw the government regulate for net zero. Then what you're seeing now is that consultation on passenger cars, and that's why, because actually it is one of the biggest proportions of that journey towards net zero is the transformation of passenger cars and vans to electric. When you look at the ecosystem in the UK, you've got the Faraday Institution, and that's 450 top-notch researchers. You've got who are connected. And it's the sort of connected bit that's interesting, right? You've then got a collaborative R&D portfolio in the UK as well, and that's probably a similar sort of number of people doing R&D and sort of taking it off the university bench and taking it through to prototype. And the last bit is BIC. So BIC has, I think, around 90 to 100 engineers in it, and that's the manufacturing piece of that puzzle.
So I think definitely the barrier to mass adoption so far has clearly been the price of these batteries. They have been relatively expensive, and that meant that manufacturing an electric vehicle was more expensive than manufacturing an internal combustion engine vehicle, so manufacturers couldn't make the same margins on those vehicles. Luckily for kind of most people around the world, we're getting to the point now where the cost to manufacture an electric vehicle will start to reach parity with an internal combustion engine vehicle in the next kind of 2 or 3 years, and in some instances it's already happened. So you can easily argue that the Tesla kind of Model S is at parity with an equivalent vehicle, but that is of course a luxury vehicle, and that's not going to help the majority of people in India, as you say. So prices do need to come down further, but in places like China, actually there are already electric vehicles out there that are cost competitive with electric vehicles in other parts of the world.
So that's an encouraging perspective, because I mean it shows that we're definitely on the right track, and in some countries, they're ahead in that respect in terms of pure cost. UK might want to focus on performance, partly because of the nature of its industry. So current lithium-ion battery technology will take us so far. We don't quite know how far it'll take us, but it'll take us so far. And we're already looking, many companies, Ilika included, at what happens after that. So the UK government has a role here as well, to encourage that future battery technology.
For me, some of the next gen ones that really excite me, I mean, I'm with Ilika, so I'm going to have to say solid state. And I think that's really because when you're looking at transport, if you can bring that weight to power ratio to a better place, then you're really going to start to fly, right? Excuse the pun, right? But that is what we're talking about. The weight of current lithium ion is going to be an issue, as is bringing that cost down. But I think there's a massive economy of scale on the advanced lithium ion that the world will benefit from for years to come.
I think scale is important here, and we expect at BloombergNEF that if the supply chain comes together at scale, these technologies, advanced technologies like solid state batteries, can be cost competitive with traditional liquid-based lithium-ion systems. But it really does have to have the supply chain to support it. So new materials like there's kind of solid electrolytes, the lithium metal anodes at high purity, thin, etc., or silicon anodes, if that's the technology that's being used. You have to scale those supply chains in order to reach the kind of cost points that we think are achievable with solid state battery technology.
If you can replace them with a solid state, which is going to be lighter, more powerful, you can put it into applications in different ways, you're going to start to see the world sort of change. For me, I'd love to see a UK supply chain develop for that.
But that supply chain issue, I mean, the world is one big supply chain, as we saw perhaps during the COVID. How realistic is it to say that we want things local versus things are likely to be truly international? Will it be that countries can have local supply chains, or is that just fighting a trend that is not going to be fightable?
I think we're probably moving in the direction where more localized supply chains are favored for a number of different reasons. I mean, firstly, if we look at the UK and its closest trading partner, Europe, if you want to start selling batteries into Europe, you're going to have to meet local content requirements, and that in itself is going to help support the localization of supply chains. And certainly the push for sustainability as well, which I think goes hand in hand with electric vehicles. Again, that really does support localized supply chains, because you can more easily eliminate some of the kind of embedded emissions with transporting material. As well as that, you can start to have better control of that supply chain itself. If you're sourcing material from half the world away, it becomes harder to know exactly how that is being produced and the kind of sustainability behind that. Whereas if it's coming from mines or facilities in your local area, your kind of quality control on that is much easier.
For me, things like the UK BIC, working in partnership with Ilika, they're going to be some of the really exciting technologies to watch.
We're hoping that those collaborations can lead to new innovation in the UK, new intellectual property, which is all part of, because it's not just a physical thing being owned by the UK, it's the idea and the concept being owned by the UK, which becomes an exportable item because of the IP.